The night I found out I had $1.9 million sitting in a trust fund left by my grandmother, I was eating a cold can of soup in my car because my electricity had been shut off for the third time that year. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat there in the dark with a plastic spoon in my hand, reading the letter from the estate attorney on my phone screen, and I thought she knew. She always knew exactly what she was doing. My grandmother passed away 6 weeks before that night, quietly in her sleep, the way she had lived without drama, without demanding attention from anyone. She was the kind of woman who kept a garden even in winter, who pressed flowers between the pages of books she'd already memorized, who made you feel like you were the most important person in the room, even when the room was full. She was the only person in my entire family who ever looked at me and saw something worth keeping. Her name was Ruth, and apparently she had been quietly setting aside money for me for over 30 years. I'm Maya. I'm 31 years old, and I've spent most of my adult life being the family's favorite disappointment. Not the kind of disappointment that people talk about out loud. Nobody in my family would ever say to my face that they thought less of me. They were too polished for that. My mother was a retired school administrator. My father had spent 25 years in corporate finance before his early retirement. My older brother, Daniel, was a district manager for a medical supply company. My older sister, Priscilla, had married a man named Todd, who owned 3 car dealerships, and spent a lot of time talking about owning 3 car dealerships. And then there was me, a pediatric home health aide who drove a 2013 Honda Civic with a cracked rearview mirror and took double shifts on weekends to keep up with rent. The work itself never embarrassed me. I loved it. I spent my days with kids who needed someone patient and steady, kids who couldn't always tell you what they needed but whose faces lit up when you walked through the door. That meant everything to me. But at every family dinner, every holiday gathering, every casual Sunday phone call with my mother, I felt the weight of what I wasn't. The salary I didn't make, the house I didn't own, the husband I hadn't found, the ambition they had decided I was missing. The one person who never made me feel that weight was my grandmother. She called me every Tuesday evening. Not because it was scheduled, we just fell into it naturally, the way 2 people do when they genuinely want to talk to each other. She asked about my kids. She remembered their names, their diagnoses, their little milestones that I'd mentioned weeks before. She'd say, "How is little Marcus doing with his physical therapy?" And I'd be stunned that she held on to that she cared enough to hold on to it. When she got sick last year, I was the one who drove the 2 hours to her house every weekend. I reorganized her medications, drove her to her appointments, sat with her on the porch in the afternoons when she was too tired to do much of anything. My mother visited twice. Daniel came once, around Christmas, and spent most of the visit on his phone. Priscilla sent a fruit basket. I'm not saying this to earn credit. I'm saying it because of what came later, because of what it revealed. Grandma Ruth passed away on a Tuesday morning in March. I got the call while I was in the middle of a shift and I had to sit in my car for 20 minutes before I could go back inside and function like a normal person. She was 83. She had lived a long and full life. None of that made it easier. The weeks after her death were brutal, in a way I hadn't expected. Not just the grief, though that was enough on its own, but the sudden, sharp loneliness of not having her. I hadn't realized how much of my emotional life had been organized around those Tuesday calls. How much of my sense of being seen had come from one person. Meanwhile, my family moved through the logistics of her passing with a kind of efficient detachment that turned my stomach. There were conversations about the house, about her furniture, about which pieces of her jewelry were worth appraising. My mother approached it all like a project with a timeline. My brother and sister circled every discussion with barely concealed impatience. I stayed quiet. I helped where I could. I cleared out her pantry and donated the food. I returned her library books. I watered her garden for 6 more weeks, even after the estate was officially settled, because I couldn't stand the thought of it dying. The letter from the attorney arrived on a Thursday. I had to read it 4 times before I understood it. My grandmother had established a trust in my name, in 1994, the year I was born. She had contributed to it steadily for 30 years, making modest but consistent deposits, reinvesting returns, managing it with the same quiet discipline she applied to everything in her life. By the time of her passing, the trust had grown to $1.94 million. She left a handwritten note with the legal documents. It said, "Maya, you never needed anyone to tell you your worth. But I hope this tells you anyway. Take care of yourself the way you've always taken care of everyone else. All my love. Always, Grandma Ruth." I sat in my dark car and read that note until my phone battery died. I didn't tell anyone. This wasn't a strategic decision at first. It was instinct. Something in me knew the way you know certain things before your brain catches up that the information would change everything, and not in the ways I wanted. So I stayed quiet. I went back to work. I paid to have my electricity restored. I met with the estate attorney, set up a private account, and began the slow process of figuring out what came next. For 2 months, I lived my normal life with an enormous secret sitting inside it. And then my car broke down on the interstate at 7 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. I was on my way to a patient visit, a 7-year-old named Caleb, who had spinal muscular atrophy, and whose family counted on me to be there by 8 so his mother could get to work. My engine light had been on for weeks. I'd known it was coming. But I hadn't had time, or I told myself I hadn't had time, and now I was sitting on the shoulder of I-85 watching smoke curl out from under my hood. I called a tow truck. I called Caleb's mother to explain and apologize. Then I sat there and did the mental math that I'd been avoiding for 2 months. I had almost $2 million, and I had let a child down today because I was still driving a car that should have been replaced 3 years ago. Something shifted in me on that shoulder of the highway. I realized I had been so afraid of being seen, of being questioned, of being claimed that I hadn't even let myself feel what had actually happened. My grandmother had loved me enough to spend 30 years building something for me, and I was sitting here like it wasn't real. I started making changes quietly. I bought a reliable car used, nothing flashy, a 2021 Subaru that started every time and had working heat. I found a financial advisor through the estate attorney's referral and began learning what to actually do with the trust. I started looking at apartments in a neighborhood I'd always wanted to live in but told myself was out of reach. I didn't breathe a word to my family. About 3 weeks after the car breakdown, I got a call from my sister Priscilla. This was unusual. Priscilla and I spoke maybe 4 times a year, and usually only when something was required of me, a birthday event, a holiday appearance, occasionally a favor that she framed as an opportunity for me to contribute to something important. She opened with small talk that lasted approximately 90 seconds before she arrived at the actual point. She and Todd were in trouble. Not deeply personal trouble, financial trouble. One of the dealerships had taken on a bad investment. They had a cash flow gap of about $40,000 that they needed to cover before the end of the month, or they'd have to close the location and lay off 11 people. Todd was already stretched with loans. Could I help? There was a pause after she asked. A calculated pause, I realized. The kind that creates pressure. "Priscilla," I said, "I make $36,000 a year." "I know," she said quickly. "I know. I just thought maybe you have savings, or Todd says there are personal loan options if you have decent credit. We could even pay the interest." "I don't have $40,000, I said, which was technically true. I had much more. She sighed. She said she understood. She said she appreciated me listening. She said she hoped things would turn around for them soon, in a tone that implied the situation was somewhat my fault for not resolving it. We hung up. I stared at the ceiling of my new apartment for a long time. Priscilla had never once asked how I was doing after Grandma Ruth died. She had not called to check on me. She had not sent so much as a text. The first call in 8 months was to ask for $40,000. Something solidified in me that afternoon. Not bitterness, I want to be clear about that, because bitterness would have made what came next about them. It wasn't about them. It was about me finally understanding something I'd been circling my whole life. The way I had been positioned in this family, and what I was going to do about it. My brother called 6 days later. Daniel was smoother about it than Priscilla. He started with 20 minutes of genuine-sounding conversation, asked about my job, mentioned that he'd been thinking about Grandma Ruth lately, said he missed her. I let myself feel a small flicker of something. Maybe I'd misread him. Maybe grief had opened something in him. Then he mentioned that he had a business opportunity. A former colleague was starting a logistics company and needed early investors. The minimum was $25,000, but he thought he could negotiate it down to $18,000. He wasn't asking me to invest for him, he was sharing an opportunity. Of course, if I happened to want to participate alongside him, he could get me in on the same terms. I asked him one question. Daniel, when did Grandma Ruth die? He paused. March. Why? What day in March? Another pause. Longer this time. The 14th? The 15th? She died on a Tuesday, March the 9th. My brother didn't know the date his grandmother died. I can't help you with this, I said, and ended the call. My mother called that same evening. I wondered briefly if they'd coordinated, then decided it didn't matter. My mother's approach was different from both of her other children. She didn't ask for money. She talked about legacy. She talked about what Grandma Ruth would have wanted for the family to support each other, to be unified, to use whatever resources were available for the collective good. She talked about Priscilla's situation and how devastating it would be for those 11 employees and their families. She talked about Daniel's opportunity and how a small investment could set him up for real security. She said, very carefully, that she had always believed in me, even when things had been difficult for me. That she knew I wasn't where I'd hoped to be in life, but that she was proud of the person I was. She had never, in 31 years, said those words to me. I recognized what they were. They were currency. She was spending them. Mom, I said, I really appreciate you saying that. I meant it, in a complicated way that I didn't try to explain. I have to go. I have an early shift tomorrow. I hung up and sat with everything I was feeling for a long time. It was during that same month, the month my family suddenly remembered I existed, that something else happened. Something that had nothing to do with money. One of my regular patients, a 4-year-old girl named Lily, had taken a bad turn. She had a degenerative condition that we'd been managing well, but there was a new complication, and she was going to need a specialist evaluation at a children's hospital 3 states away. Her parents were both working hourly jobs. They had no savings for travel, no one who could stay with their other 2 children, no flexibility in their schedules that would let them take 4 days off work. The specialist had an opening in 3 weeks. If they missed it, the next availability was 5 months out. Lily's mother, whose name was Dina, told me this with the kind of flat exhaustion that comes from running out of places to put your fear. She wasn't crying. She was just tired. She'd gone through all the options she could think of and none of them worked. I drove home that evening and did something I hadn't let myself do in months. I made a decision without second-guessing it. I paid for the specialist visit, travel, lodging, and medical costs. I arranged it through the hospital's patient assistance office, so it came through a third-party account, and Dina didn't know it was me. I just made sure the obstacles disappeared. 3 weeks later, Dina texted me a photo of Lily at the hospital. She was wearing a paper crown that one of the nurses had made for her, and she was grinning this enormous gap-toothed grin that took up her whole face. Dina's message said, "We still don't know who made this happen, but God does. Thank you for caring so much about her." She didn't know it was me. She thanked me anyway, just for being someone who cared. I thought about that for a long time. I thought about the kind of person who drives 3 hours in the middle of the night. The kind of person who shows up with their last $300, not because they can afford to lose it, but because they cannot afford to be someone who doesn't. I thought about my grandmother, who had spent 30 years building something for me without ever mentioning it, without ever using it to make me feel indebted or observed. That's the kind of person I wanted to be. Not because it was strategic, but because it was true. I want to tell you about my coworker, because she's the center of all of this, the part that matters most. Her name is Renata. She had been at the home health agency about 8 months when I really got to know her. She was 34, originally from Guatemala, and she had a way of moving through difficult moments with patience, with difficult family members, with administrative systems that didn't work the way they were supposed to, that I came to think of as a kind of grace, underweight. She didn't perform cheerfulness. She was just fundamentally committed to doing right by the people she cared for, even when it cost her. We started sharing lunch breaks, then car rides to overlapping patient visits, then longer conversations that had nothing to do with work. Renata was going through something hard. Her landlord had decided not to renew her lease. The building was being converted to condos, and she had 60 days to find a new place in a rental market that had become almost impossible for someone making what we made. She had a 9-year-old daughter, Sophia, who was doing beautifully in her current school and whose stability Renata was terrified to disrupt. The apartments in that school district were out of her price range. The apartments she could afford meant pulling Sophia out mid-year. She talked about it the way people talk about something they've already accepted as a loss. Like she'd already done the grieving and now she was just navigating the aftermath. One afternoon, after a long shift, she drove me home because my car was in the shop for a routine service. Nothing like the old days, when in the shop meant possibly permanent. On the way, she got a call from a landlord. I watched her face while she listened. It was one of those calls where you can tell from one side of it that the answer is no, and you watch someone absorb that no and add it to a stack of other no's. She hung up and was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sophia's going to be okay. Kids are resilient." She was convincing herself. I sat with what I knew and what I had and what I could do. I thought about all the ways I'd been afraid to be visible, to be known, to be claimed. And I thought about my grandmother, who had never asked for recognition, who had just quietly loved me into a safety net I didn't know was there. I talked to my financial advisor. I talked to a real estate attorney. I spent several days thinking very carefully about what I was doing and why, and whether it was something I could sustain, and whether it was coming from the right place. Then I made Renata an offer. I had found a small duplex in the school district. The owner was an older man who was ready to sell and had been sitting on the property for 2 years. I bought it. Not as an investment, though my advisor helped me structure it reasonably. As a home, first. I offered Renata the lower unit at a rent that was below market but not charity fare, and one she could build from. A real lease, real terms, nothing that made her feel like she owed me something she hadn't agreed to. I told her where the money had come from. Not because I wanted credit, but because she deserved to understand that this was real and secure, and not going to disappear. She was quiet for a very long time. Then she said, "Maya, why?" I told her about my grandmother. I told her about the Tuesday phone calls, and the pressed flowers and the letter that said, "Take care of yourself the way you've always taken care of everyone else." I told her that I was trying to learn what that meant, and I thought this was part of it. She cried. I cried. Sophia was at school, which felt like good timing. Renata moved in 6 weeks later. Sophia kept her school. On the first Tuesday of every month, because I am who I am and patterns matter to me, Renata and Sophia come upstairs for dinner. Nothing formal, just dinner. My family found out about the money 3 months after that. Not because I told them. Because estate documents are not entirely private, and my brother, who has always been persistent about financial information, when he suspects there is some to find, eventually connected enough pieces. My mother called on a Sunday morning. I knew the moment I heard her voice that she knew. She said she wished I had told them. She said it hurt her to think I had kept something so significant from the people who loved me. She said she understood why I might have been cautious, but she hoped I knew that family was always the right place to turn, that whatever had happened in the past, we were all on the same side. I listened to all of it. Then I said, "Mom, when Priscilla called me for $40,000, she didn't know about the trust. When Daniel called about his investment, he didn't know about the trust. And when you called to tell me you were proud of me for the first time, Mom, the first time in 31 years you didn't know about the trust." Silence. "I'm not angry," I said, and I wasn't, not in the way I might have been years ago, the burning kind of anger that wants to be witnessed. This was something quieter. I just know now what I knew then. And I think we both know too. My mother started to cry. Genuine tears. I believe that. Grief is complicated and people are complicated, and I have lived long enough to know that you can love someone and still fail them in the same breath. I don't think my mother is a villain. I think she is someone who organized her love around a value system that didn't have room for me the way I actually was, and I think she is beginning to understand what that cost. We are in a careful, early, honest kind of contact now. We talk on the phone occasionally. She asks about my work. She asked once about my apartment, and I told her about the duplex, and there was a pause where I could hear her recalibrating. I didn't fill the silence. I let her find her way to it. Priscilla and I have not spoken since that call. Daniel sent me a message that was half apology and half inquiry, and I responded to the apology sincerely and left the rest unaddressed. I'm not performing forgiveness. I'm not withholding it either. I'm just living my life and leaving room for things to change when and if they're ready to change without putting my peace on hold while I wait. I still work as a home health aide. This surprises people when I tell them, though I'm not sure why it should. I don't need the income anymore, but I need the work. I need Caleb's face when I walk in on Monday mornings. I need to be someone who shows up, who stays, who learns a child's name and keeps it. I do work fewer hours now, which means I do the work better. I'm not running on fumes. I'm not counting minutes. I'm actually there, in the room, the way Renata is always in the room. Grandma Ruth left me $1.94 million and a note that told me to take care of myself the way I'd always taken care of everyone else. I've spent the better part of a year trying to understand what that means, practically, in daily life. I don't think I've figured it all out, but I think I know the shape of it. It means buying the reliable car before the breakdown, not after. It means paying for Lily's specialist visit without needing anyone to know. It means giving Renata a real floor to stand on, and then having dinner with her and Sophia on Tuesday evenings because they are, honestly, the best part of my week. It means saying what's true to my mother, even when it's hard, even when she cries, and not feeling responsible for managing her feelings about it. It means understanding that love is not a debt, and that real love, the Ruth kind, never asks to be repaid. It means knowing that the people who showed up for you before you had anything to offer those are your people. Not because they passed a test, because they showed you who they already were. Renata didn't know I had money when she drove me home after that long shift, still talking about Sophia's resilience like she was trying to believe it hard enough for both of them. She was just being Renata. She was just being exactly who she always is. That's everything. That's the whole thing. I think about my grandmother every Tuesday. I water the small herb garden I started on my kitchen windowsill, rosemary, thyme, a lavender plant that's doing better than expected. I press a flower from it occasionally between the pages of whatever book I'm reading. I don't know if that's grief or gratitude or just the slow inheritance of someone else's beautiful habits. Probably all three. I take care of myself now. I'm learning what that means, day by day. She would be so pleased to know it.